Rikers Supermax. How the strong survive and the weak fall. The breaking point. The metal door slammed shut, echoing down the cold hallway. Inside one of Rikers Island's Supermax blocks, two inmates circled each other like predators. One was a giant, covered in gang tattoos, his eyes burning with rage. The other was thin, nervous, clutching his food tray as if it were a shield. What happened next showed exactly how Rikers works. The strong dominate. The weak are crushed. The tray hit the ground. In seconds, fists flew. Steel-toed boots stomped, and the sound of bones cracking filled the block. Correction officers didn't rush in right away. They watched, waited, because in Rikers, survival is a game. If you're weak, you fall. But here's the question. How did it reach this boiling point? Why was this inmate targeted? And what secrets about life in Rikers Supermax does this violent moment expose? Welcome to Rikers Supermax. Rikers Island isn't just a jail. It's a world of its own, hidden behind razor wire and surrounded by water. The Supermax blocks are the darkest corners of this world, built to cage the most dangerous and unpredictable inmates. When a new prisoner arrives, the first lesson is simple. Strength is everything. The way you walk, the way you eat, even the way you look at someone can decide your fate. Some inmates quickly learn how to stand tall, project fear, and connect with gangs. Others, those who hesitate or show weakness, become prey. At first, the new arrivals face small tests. A stolen piece of bread from their tray, a shove in the hallway, a whispered threat in the yard. For the strong, these moments are a chance to show they won't back down. For the weak, they're warnings of something worse to come. One inmate, a young man barely 20, found out the hard way. He tried to keep his head down, avoid trouble. But in Rikers, looking scared as blood in the water. Within days, his bunk was raided, his commissary items gone, and his name whispered as the next victim. And then it happened. The same night he thought he could finally sleep, 3 figures stepped into his cell. The door clicked shut behind them. The cell test. The young inmate's heart raced as the cell door shut. 3 shadows loomed over him, their faces half hidden by the dim light. One of them spoke first, his voice calm but dangerous. Hand over what's left of your commissary, or tonight gets ugly. This was the ultimate test. In Rikers Supermax, the strong survive by showing defiance. The weak fall by giving in. The boy hesitated, clutching his thin blanket, hoping it would shield him. That hesitation was enough. The first punch landed hard across his face. He staggered back, crashing against the steel bunk. The others joined in, boots slamming into his ribs, fists pounding into his stomach. Every strike wasn't just about pain. It was about sending a message. Weakness has no place here. Then, just as fast as it began, it ended. The 3 men left, leaving him curled on the floor, coughing blood. The low point. The next morning, officers walked by as if nothing happened. No reports, no questions. In Rikers, silence is part of survival, for inmates and guards alike. The boy walked the yard with bruises covering his face, but nobody cared. For others, this was entertainment, a reminder of the brutal hierarchy that ruled every corner. For a moment, life slowed. He kept to himself, stayed in the corner, and tried to recover. But word had spread. Everyone now knew he was weak. The extreme event. One afternoon, during chow, it escalated again. The same 3 men approached his table. This time, they didn't ask for food. They flipped his tray onto the ground, laughed, and dared him to pick it up. The whole block watched. This was no longer about commissary. This was a public show. A final push to break him, or force him to rise. As he bent down to grab his tray, one of the attackers shoved him hard, sending him face first into the concrete. Blood poured from his nose. The block erupted in chaos, some cheering, others banging on tables. And that's when the correction officers finally moved in, storming the chow hall with batons raised. The riot sparks. The chow hall echoed with shouts. Trays crashing to the floor and fists slamming against steel tables. Inmates banged and cheered as the young man lay bleeding on the ground, dazed and humiliated. That's when the correction officers stormed in. Boots thundered across the concrete, batons raised high, shields in formation. Everybody down. Now! They shouted, their voices lost in the roar of the block. But here's the thing about Rikers. Once the chaos begins, it's almost impossible to stop. The officers weren't just breaking up a fight. They were stepping into a powder keg. The low point. For a tense moment, the chaos slowed. Some inmates dropped to the ground, others backed away. The officers dragged the bleeding boy up by his shirt, his legs barely able to hold him. His attackers smirked, sitting calmly as if nothing had happened. It seemed like order was about to return. The officers barked orders, lining inmates against the wall. The chow hall grew quieter, the sound of boots and cuffs filling the air. But peace in Rikers never lasts. The extreme event. One inmate, huge, bald, with a scar running down his face, suddenly flipped the table, sending trays flying. The noise was deafening. He charged forward, fists swinging, aiming straight at one of the guards. That was the spark. Instantly, the room erupted into a full-blown riot. Inmates rushed from all sides, some fighting each other, others lunging at the officers. The air filled with the sound of screams, metal chairs scraping, and the dull thud of batons hitting flesh. The young inmate, still bleeding, was caught in the middle, too weak to fight, too trapped to escape. And as tear gas canisters hissed open, filling the hall with choking smoke, it became clear. This was no longer just survival. This was war. Smoke and shadows. The chow hall was swallowed by smoke. Thick, burning clouds of tear gas rolled over the tables, making eyes sting and lungs choke. Inmates coughed, gagged, and stumbled blindly. Some dropped to the floor with their hands over their faces. Others used the smoke as cover to settle old grudges. In the haze, chaos turned personal. Fights broke out in every corner. Gang rivalries, debts unpaid, grudges reignited. The officers, swinging their batons, were overwhelmed. Their shields clashed against fists and makeshift weapons. And in the middle of it all, the young inmate crawled on his hands and knees, searching for air, searching for a way out. The low point. For a moment, he found shelter under a flip table. His vision blurred, his chest heaving as he pulled in shallow breaths. The screams and thuds outside the smoke felt distant, muffled by fear. But fear was its own prison. The boy realized what everyone already knew. Once the riot ended, he would still be marked, still weak, still a target. Then, through the smoke, a figure crouched beside him. It wasn't a guard. It was another inmate, a stocky man with a scar across his forehead. He shoved a rag into the boy's hands. "Wet it," he hissed. "Breathe through it. Follow me." For the first time, survival seemed possible. But survival always comes with a cost. The extreme event. The pair crawled through the haze, making their way toward the back exit of the hall. Just as they neared the heavy steel door, it slammed shut. A deafening bang rang out. An officer had locked it from the other side. Suddenly, inmates at the far end of the room set a trash bin ablaze. Flames licked the ceiling, smoke turned black, and panic ripped through the crowd. Now it wasn't just a riot. It was a fire trap. And in that moment, the young inmate realized he had escaped the fists, but now he might not escape alive. Flames of fear. The fire roared to life, devouring the trash bin and crawling up the wall. Smoke poured across the ceiling, mixing with the stinging fog of tear gas. The chow hall became a furnace. Heat, screams, and the metallic clang of fists on steel. Inmates panicked. Some tried to stamp out the flames with trays. Others hurled benches at the locked doors. The guards, outnumbered and choking, pulled back, radios crackling with desperate calls. "We need backup. Now!" The boy, clutching the wet rag to his face, stayed low beside the scarred inmate who had pulled him into the smoke. His eyes burned, his lungs screamed for air, but he kept crawling. In Rikers Supermax, even fire couldn't pause the brutal law of survival. The low point. For a moment, the pair found themselves trapped in a corner, the fire creeping closer. The scarred inmate muttered under his breath, "We're dead if we stay here." The boy shook his head, terrified. Every instinct told him to freeze, to wait for the guards to open the doors. But in Rikers, hesitation is death. The scarred man looked at him sharply. "Listen," he growled. "You want to live? Stick with me. You owe me now." The boy nodded, though deep down he knew what that meant. In this place, favors were never free. The extreme event. Suddenly, the locked steel door at the far end buckled. A group of inmates had ripped a pipe from the wall and were using it as a battering ram. With one final slam, the hinges gave way. The door crashed open, sparks flying from the metal frame. Dozens of prisoners surged toward the exit, shoving, punching, and trampling each other to escape the smoke and flames. It wasn't an escape to freedom. It was a stampede into another block. The boy was swept into the crowd, shoved and crushed by bodies on all sides. His rag slipped from his hand, and his lungs filled with choking smoke. As he stumbled forward, gasping, he realized the fight had only shifted. What waited in the next block was even worse. The next block, the steel door gave way, and the mob poured into the adjoining block like a raging river. The air was no better here, still thick with smoke, but at least it wasn't burning. Inmates shoved past each other, coughing, bleeding, desperate for space. But what they didn't expect was that this block was already occupied. Cells rattled as prisoners inside shouted and pounded on their doors, furious at the sudden invasion. Some laughed, others threatened, and a few banged rhythmically like they were cheering on the chaos. The boy stumbled to the ground, crushed by the crowd. The scarred inmate yanked him up by his collar. "Stay on your feet," he barked. "Fall now and you're done." The low point. For a brief moment, the boy thought maybe they'd find safety in this new block. The fire was behind them. The guards were still pinned back. All he had to do was stay close to the scarred inmate. But safety is an illusion in Rikers Supermax. A group of rival gang members spotted them. They weren't interested in the riot or the fire. They saw weakness, opportunity. One pointed at the boy, grinning like a wolf. "That one's fresh meat. Ours." The scarred man tightened his jaw. He knew what was coming. The extreme event. The gang moved in, circling fast. The leader pulled a sharpened piece of metal, an improvised shank glinting under the dim lights. The crowd around them went silent for a heartbeat, sensing blood. The boy froze, his heart pounding so loud it drowned out the screams from the chow hall. His rescuer stepped forward, fists clenched, ready to fight. And then, without warning, the lights in the block cut out. Total darkness. The prison had gone into full lockdown. The only sounds left were the echo of boots, the hiss of radios, and the slow, chilling scrape of that shank dragging against the concrete. The blackout. Darkness swallowed the block. One moment, dim fluorescent lights buzzed above. The next, silence, then pitch black. The blackout wasn't just power failure. It was strategy. In Rikers Supermax, lockdown meant cutting the lights, sealing doors, and waiting for chaos to burn itself out. But for the inmates inside, the darkness was hell. Shouts echoed, fists thudded, and unseen bodies shoved in every direction. In the black, fear was magnified. Anyone could be friend or enemy. The boy's chest tightened. He couldn't see, couldn't breathe. All he felt was a scarred inmate's hand gripping his arm, pulling him through confusion. The low point. In the suffocating dark, the boy thought maybe, just maybe, the blackout would protect him. Without light, the gang couldn't find him. But then he heard it. A voice, low and calm, cutting through the noise. "We can still hear you breathing." The boy froze. The gang hadn't lost him at all. They were hunting by sound. He clamped his hand over his mouth, trembling, praying to vanish into the dark. But fear betrayed him. His breath grew ragged, loud, impossible to hide. The extreme event. Out of nowhere, a spark lit the block, a lighter flicking open. For just a second, the flame revealed their faces. 3 of them, crouched low, shanks in hand, eyes locked on him. Predators in the night. The flame snapped shut and darkness returned. But now the boy knew they were inches away. And then it began. The sound of feet rushing toward him. The scrape of metal against concrete. The sudden rush of bodies colliding in the dark. The fight for survival had found him again. Predators in the dark. The block exploded with violence in the pitch black. Grunts, crashes, and the metallic scrape of shanks slicing through the air. The boy felt a body slam into him, knocking him against the bars of the cell. His ribs screamed with pain. Hands grabbed at his shirt, trying to drag him down. He thrashed wildly, swinging blind. His fists hit nothing but air. Panic flooded his chest. Then, another grip, stronger. The scarred inmate. "Move!" he barked, shoving the boy to the side just as a blade cut past where his neck had been. The boy realized then he wasn't just a target. He was bait. The gang wanted the weak one, and anyone protecting him would pay the price. The low point. For a moment, they found a pocket of space against the wall. The scarred man crouched, breathing heavy. "Kid," he growled, "if you freeze again, you're gone. You fight or you die. No in-between." The boy's hands trembled. He'd never fought in his life, not really, but the prison had stripped away choices. He could hear the gang circling in the dark, whispering, taunting. Fear was crushing him. Survival seemed impossible. The extreme event. Then, a flash of light ripped through the black. Not a lighter this time, but guard's flashlight cutting across the chaos. The beam landed directly on the boy, lighting him up like prey in the jungle. The gang lunged, shanks glinting, shadows rushing, the sound of rage filling the block. The scarred inmate stepped in front of him, swinging hard. A sickening crunch followed, and someone screamed. But the boy wasn't safe. Not yet. The light vanished as quickly as it appeared, plunging them back into blackness. And in the dark, the boy felt it. Something wet and warm splashing across his arm. Blood. Blood in the blackout. The boy froze. His arm was slick with blood, and it wasn't his. The scarred inmate staggered, clutching his side. Even in the dark, the boy could hear the wet sound of breath rattling in his chest. The man who had saved him was hurt, badly. "Don't stop," the scarred inmate wheezed, shoving the boy forward. "Keep moving. Don't let them," his voice cracked, swallowed by the chaos. The boy's heart pounded. He wanted to help, but every second wasted gave the gang more time to close in. The scrape of boots and the hiss of whispers told him they were still hunting, still circling. The low point. For the first time, the boy felt completely alone. His protector was bleeding out. The guards were nowhere to be seen. The gang owned the dark. He crouched low, pressing his back against the cold concrete. His thoughts spiraled. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is how I fall. The sound of chains rattling filled the block as inmates inside their cells laughed and shouted, egging on the violence. "Get him! Finish it!" one voice screamed. Another laughed cruelly. "Fresh meat don't last long in here." The boy's fear threatened to crush him. The extreme event. Then he felt it. A hand on his ankle. Fingers digging in, trying to drag him across the floor. He kicked wildly, his heel connecting with the jaw. A grunt of pain followed. But another set of hands grabbed at his shirt. In desperation. The boy reached out blindly, and his hand closed around something sharp lying on the ground. A piece of broken metal, jagged like a blade. For the first time, he held a weapon, and in the suffocating dark of Rikers Supermax, survival demanded a choice. Stay prey or fight back. The first strike, the jagged piece of metal shook in his hand. His palms were slick with sweat, his chest heaved. But for the first time since stepping into Rikers, he wasn't completely powerless. The gang's footsteps rushed closer in the dark. A hand slammed against his shoulder, trying to drag him down. Instinct took over. He swung the shard wildly. A scream cut through the block. The grip on his shoulder loosened, then vanished. The boy stood frozen, his heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. He didn't know where the blade landed. He didn't even care. For the first time, he'd struck back. The low point. The silence that followed was worse than the fight. Inmates inside their cells banged on the bars, hollering, "He did it!" The kid finally fought. Laughter and taunts filled the black. But this was no victory. The boy knew what it meant. He had crossed a line. Violence was survival here, but it also marked him. Now, he wasn't just weak prey. He was a threat, and threats always brought retaliation. He crouched, clutching the shard tighter, the weight of his choice crushing him. He wanted to live, but living in Rikers came with a price that never stopped rising. The extreme event. Suddenly, the overhead lights blazed back on. The blackout ended. and the scene was revealed. Blood pooled on the floor. One of the gang members, Riot, clutching his arm with a shard, had cut deep. Guards stormed the block, shields up, rifles raised, barking orders. But before they could even reach him, every eye in the block turned toward the boy. The inmates pressed against their bars, grinning, whispering one word again and again: "Killer, killer, killer." He had survived the night. But in Rikers Supermax, survival only makes you a bigger target, marked as a killer. The floodlights burned down, erasing every shadow. Guards stormed in with shields and batons, pinning inmates to the walls. The clang of cuffs snapping shut echoed through the block. Tear gas still lingered in the air, mixing with the acrid stench of smoke and blood. The boy stood frozen, the jagged shard still clenched in his trembling hand. A guard spotted him and barked, "Drop it." He did, the piece of metal clattering to the floor, slick with red. 2 guards tackled him hard, pressing his face into the concrete. His ribs screamed, but all around him the inmates weren't silent. They were chanting, "Killer, killer, killer." Their voices carried like a drumbeat, mocking, warning, celebrating. In Rikers, names stick fast, and this one would follow him. The low point, dragged to his feet, wrist chained. He tried to explain. "They jumped me, I had no choice." But the officers didn't care. Survival stories didn't matter here. Paperwork did. They shoved him down the corridor, past rows of inmates who pressed against the bars, grinning wide, whispering promises. "You're one of us now," one muttered. Another sneered, "You won't last a week." The boy's stomach churned. The label killer might have scared off the weak, but it drew in the strong. And the strong would come for him. The extreme event. The guards threw him into solitary confinement, the steel door slamming shut. Alone in the tiny, suffocating cell, he thought maybe, finally, he was safe. But within minutes, the vents above rattled with voices. Other inmates from nearby cells called down the line, their words slithering through pipes. "Welcome to the big leagues, kid. You cut one of ours. Now you're marked. Don't sleep too long. We'll be waiting." The boy presses back against the wall, the chant still echoing in his ears. "Killer, killer, killer." For the first time, he realized surviving one night didn't mean he had won. It meant the real fight had only begun. Alone but never safe. The walls of solitary pressed him like a coffin. The boy sat on the concrete floor, staring at the steel door that sealed him away from the rest of Rikers. To anyone outside, it looked like safety. But inside, it was a different kind of torture. The silence was heavy, broken only by the buzz of flickering light and the faint clank of doors down the tier. Hours stretched like days. No fights, no flames, no chaos, just him and the weight of his thoughts. But solitude in Rikers isn't real. The prison breathes through its vents and pipes. Voices snake their way into every cell. And soon enough, they found him. The low point. It started with whispers. "Killer!" drifting down the line. Then laughter. Then promises. "You cut one of ours. You're marked now. Don't worry, we'll see you soon. You can't hide in the box forever." The boy pressed his hands over his ears. But it didn't matter. The gangs didn't need to touch him yet. Words alone could break a man in solitary. Every night, they taunted him through the vents, reminding him that Rikers never forgets. Solitary might have kept their fists away, but their reach was endless. The extreme event. Then came the knock. 3 slow bangs on the steel door of a cell. Too deliberate to be a guard. Too mocking to be an accident. He froze, heart pounding. Who was out there? A voice slipped to the flap in the door, calm and chilling. "Word is spreading. You're either with us or you're next." The flap slammed shut, leaving only silence. And in that silence, the boy realized surviving Rikers wasn't about strength alone. It was about choosing sides. And whichever choice he made, someone was going to bleed. Choosing sides. The cell was silent except for his own breathing. But the words through the flap kept repeating in his head. With us or next. In Rikers Supermax, neutrality doesn't exist. You're either protected by numbers or swallowed by them. The boy sat on the cold floor, hands trembling. He remembered the scarred inmate bleeding for him. saving him again and again. But he also remembered the gang's faces, their shanks glinting in the dark, their whispers promising vengeance. He knew the truth. Standing alone meant certain death. But joining meant becoming part of the same violence that nearly killed him. The low point. The next day, a guard slid a tray of food through the slot. The boy reached for it, starving. But before he could touch it, another tray slid into the cell right behind his, stuffed with extra bread, chips, and even candy. On top was a note, written in rough pencil. "Eat well, little killer. We take care of our own. You're with us now." His stomach growled. His chest tightened. Was this protection or a chain around his neck? The extreme event. That night, the vents carried a new message. This time it wasn't a whisper. It was a demand. "Tomorrow, the guards move us to yard. When it happens, you'll prove yourself. We'll point him out. You know what to do." The boy froze, his heart hammering in his chest. They weren't asking him to survive anymore. They were asking him to strike first. And in Rikers, refusing an order could be more dangerous than following it. The yard test. The heavy doors creaked open, and the prisoners shuffled into the yard. Chain-link fences topped with razor wire cut the sky into jagged shapes. Correction officers lined the walls, rifles slung but eyes sharp. For the boy, it felt like walking into an arena. Every inmate seemed to be watching, even those pretending not to. The gangs had spread the word. This was his moment. The scarred inmate, still alive but bandaged and limping, was nowhere in sight. This time, the boy was truly on his own. The low point. The yard buzzed with energy. Some men worked out, slamming weights against the ground. Others leaned against the fence, trading jokes. But under it all was tension. Everyone waiting to see what the killer would do. One of the gang members slid up beside him, their voice low, their smile sharp. "See that guy over there? He's the mark. Soft. Alone. Same way you look when you came in." The boy followed the pointing finger. Across the yard, a thin man sat by himself, head down, trying not to be noticed. The target. The boy's stomach twisted. It wasn't survival this time. It was initiation. The extreme event. The gang pressed closer, whispering, "Do it. Now. Or you're finished." The boy's hands trembled. He looked at the shard slipped into his palm. A weapon passed him, so smoothly the guards didn't even notice. His heart pounded so loud it drowned out the yard noise. If he stabbed, he'd be theirs forever. If he refused, he'd be dead by nightfall. As the target looked up, confused, the boy rose to his feet, weapon in hand. Every eye in the yard turned toward him. The strong survive. The weak fall. And this moment would decide which one he would be. The choice. The yard fell silent. Even the clang of weights and the shuffle of feet stopped. Every inmate knew what was about to happen. The boy stood with the shard in his hand, the gang circling behind him like vultures. Across the yard, the thin man sat frozen, wide-eyed, realizing too late he'd been marked. The boy's breath shook. His mind screamed two words over and over. "Do it or die." The low point. He stepped forward. The gang smirked, satisfied. The other prisoners leaned closer to the fence, hungry for blood. The target's lips trembled as he whispered, "Please don't." The boy's hand trembled. He saw himself in that man, weak, scared, prey. He remembered nights spent curled up in fear, waiting for the next beating. Was this who he was now? Was this how survival worked? The pressure crushed him. Every second of hesitation brought him closer to his own death. The extreme event. Then it happened. The boy raised the shard high. Inmates roared, guards tensed, the yard braced to strike. But instead of stabbing the target, he spun and slashed at the gang members standing closest behind him. The shard tore across the man's arm, sending him stumbling back with a scream. Chaos erupted. The yard exploded in shouts and movement, bodies surging like a wave. Guards rushed in, sirens blaring, boots pounding, batons cracked against skulls. And in the middle of the frenzy, the boy stood shaking, knowing what he had just done. He hadn't joined the gang. He hadn't bowed to fear. He had made himself a target for everyone. The fallout. The yard was chaos. Sirens blared, boots thundered, and shouts ricocheted off the razor wire walls. Guards flooded the yard with shields and batons, dragging bodies down and slamming inmates face first into the dirt. The boy was tackled hard, his arm twisted behind his back. The shard ripped from his grip. His cheek ground into the gravel as cuffs bit into his wrists. He could barely breathe, but through the dust and pain he saw everything. The gang member he cut was howling, clutching his bleeding arm. His brothers weren't screaming in pain, though. They were laughing, not because they'd lost, but because they'd found their next target. The low point, dragged to his feet, the boy was shoved toward the doors. The gang's eyes locked on him. They didn't shout threats. They didn't need to. Their silence was worse than any words. Inside, the guards pushed him down the hallway, slamming him against the wall while shouting at each other. He just started a war in the yard. One barked. Another spat. Kid's finished. They'll eat him alive. The boy's chest heaved. Every muscle screamed with fear. He knew the truth. By cutting a gang soldier instead of the mark, he had broken the code. He hadn't just refused initiation. He had declared war on the people who ruled Rikers. The extreme event. Back in his cell, the chants returned almost instantly. They echoed down the block, louder than ever, carrying one word over and over. Dead man. Dead man. Dead man. It wasn't just a gang now. It was the whole prison. By trying to stand alone, he hadn't escaped the game. He had painted the biggest target possible on his back. And as the steel door slammed shut, he realized something far darker. The strong survive. The weak fall. But what happens to the ones who refuse to play the game at all? The price of defiance. The block was never quiet again. Every time the boy closed his eyes, the voices started. From the cells, from the vents, from every corner of Rikers Supermax. You're marked. You're done. Dead man walking. The gangs didn't rush. They didn't have to. In prison, patience is a weapon. They knew the boy had nowhere to go. The low point. In solitary, the guards gave him just enough food to keep him alive, just enough air to keep him breathing. But even here, he wasn't safe. A note slid under his door one morning, folded small, written in jagged pencil. You drew blood. You think that makes you strong. But the strong don't stand alone. We're coming. The boy tore it up, his hand shaking. He tried to tell himself it was only paper, only words. But deep down, he knew it wasn't a threat. It was a schedule. The extreme event. A week later, the door to his cell creaked open. 2 guards stood waiting, faces blank. Yard time, one said flatly. The boy's chest tightened. He knew what yard time meant now. It wasn't just exercise. It was opportunity for someone else. As they led him down the corridor, every inmate pressed against the bars, grinning, whispering. Some laughed, some mimed slashing throats. Others simply stared, cold and hungry. When the steel gates opened to the yard, the boy stepped into the sunlight for the first time in days. And waiting for him, lined up at the far fence, were the same gang members he had cut, their eyes locked on him, their fists clenching. The guards didn't stop them. They didn't move at all. The boy realized the terrifying truth. This wasn't punishment. This was a setup, the ambush. The boy stepped into the yard, the sun blinding after days in solitary. For a moment, it almost felt like freedom. Open sky above, cool air on his skin. But then he saw them. The gang leaned against the far fence, waiting. Their faces were calm, almost casual. But their eyes told the truth. Today was payback. The guards lingered near the gates, their arms folded, their stares empty. No shields raised, no batons ready. They weren't here to stop it. They were here to watch. The low point. The boy's legs felt heavy as he moved into the yard. He glanced around, hoping for escape, but there was nowhere to go. Razor wire crowned the fences. Armed towers watched overhead. And worst of all, other inmates had circled closer, not to help, but to watch. The yard became an arena again, just like before. He could hear the whispers ripple through the crowd. Dead man walking. This is it. Showtime. He swallowed hard. The shard he once clutched was gone. This time, He had nothing but his fists. The extreme event. The first gang member pushed off the fence, cracking his knuckles. Another followed, then another. They walked in slow, deliberate steps, spreading out to cut off any escape. The leader grinned wide, showing gold teeth. He pulled something from his waistband, small, jagged, and sharp. A shank. The boy's heart pounded in his ears. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to run. The circle closed tighter. The leader raised the shank, pointing it at the boy's chest. And then, just as the first strike came, another voice roared across the yard. "Enough!" The crowd froze, head snapping toward the sound. It wasn't a guard. It was an inmate, the unexpected ally. Every head in the yard turned. Standing near the pull-up bars was a towering inmate, muscles carved like stone, his arms covered in tattoos that told his life story. Gang wars, prison years, survival. He wasn't just another prisoner. He was one of the old lions of Rikers, someone everyone knew and no one dared cross. His name carried weight, and his presence commanded silence. The leader of the gang hesitated, shank still raised. "This ain't your business," he spat. The older inmate stepped forward, his voice calm but dangerous. The kid fought back. He earned blood. That means he ain't yours to break anymore. The yard buzzed with whispers. This wasn't protection. It was a claim. The boy wasn't safe. He was now part of a bigger game. The low point. The boy's knees shook. He didn't know this man, didn't ask for his help. But in Rikers, choices vanish fast. If the old lion was stepping in, it meant one thing. The boy was valuable, and being valuable was as dangerous as being weak. The gang leader sneered. "You think you can keep him alive forever? He's marked." The old lion's eyes narrowed. "So was I, and I'm still here." The tension hung thick in the air. For a second, it seemed the yard would explode again. The extreme event. Instead, the gang backed off, their laughter echoing like a promise. The leader pointed the shank at the boy one last time. "This ain't over. We'll be waiting." The circle broke. The crowd dispersed. Guards finally barked orders, pretending they hadn't just watched everything unfold. The boy stood frozen, staring at the old lion who had just saved him. The man leaned close, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You're mine now. That means you'll live. But it also means you'll do exactly what I say." The boy's heart sank. He had escaped death again. But freedom? That was slipping further away with every breath. Under the lion's shadow. The boy's life shifted the moment the old lion stepped in. Now, every move he made was under watch, not by the guards, but by the man who claimed him. In the block, whispers spread fast. He was no longer just the killer. Now he was a lion's cub. For some, that meant untouchable. For others, it meant he was a pawn in someone else's game. The lion gave orders in short, cold sentences. "Sit here. Walk with me. Keep your head up. And most importantly, never show fear." The boy obeyed, not because he wanted to, but because in Rikers, protection came with chains. The low point. Days passed. The boy learned to move differently. Shoulders squared, eyes sharp, steps steady. But survival under the lion was a double-edged blade. Other gangs kept their distance, but their stares burned holes through him. Every smirk, every whisper, was a reminder that protection only lasts until the lion falls. And the boy started seeing the cracks. The lion was powerful, yes, but he was also older, slower, a man who carried decades of scars. His enemies were many, and his time was running out. The boy realized, when the lion fell, he'd be thrown to the wolves. The extreme event. One night, as the block quieted, a fight erupted 2 tiers down. The sound of fist shouts and steel doors banging echoed through the unit. Guards rushed past, batons in hand. But the lion didn't move. He sat on his bunk, eyes cold. "Watch close, kid," he muttered. "This is how they test us." Moments later, a body was dragged down the tier, blood trailing across the concrete. The guards didn't stop to explain. They didn't need to. The boy's stomach turned as the lion leaned in, whispering, "Next time, they'll be coming for me. And when they do, you'll have to prove you're not weak." The boy lay awake all night, realizing his survival was now tied to the survival of man every gang wanted gone. The first strike. The block buzzed with unease the next morning. Whispers floated through the vents and across the tier. It's coming! No one said what, but everyone knew. In Rikers, rumors weren't guesses. They were warnings. The boy stayed close to the lion, his chest tight, every step heavy with dread. The older man walked like nothing bothered him, like he'd survived this dance too many times before. But even the strongest men know when the walls are closing in, and they were closing in fast. The low point. That afternoon, yard call came again. The lion led the way, his broad shoulders parting the crowd. The boy followed, feeling every set of eyes on him. They found a spot near the pull-up bars. For a few minutes, things felt calm. The lion cracked his knuckles, watching the yard like a hawk. The boy tried to steady his breathing, pretending not to notice the gang members clustering along the far fence. Then the signal came, a sharp whistle. Just one note, but in Rikers, one note can unleash a storm. The boy's stomach dropped. He knew what was about to happen. The extreme event. 3 inmates broke from the fence, rushing forward fast. One carried a sharpened toothbrush. Another had a sock weighted with something heavy, and the third's fists were wrapped tight in cloth, ready for blood. The yard exploded with shouts as the ambush began. The lion met them head-on, swinging with brutal power, dropping the first attacker in one punch. But the second came from behind, the weighted sock cracking across his skull. Blood sprayed, and the lion stumbled. The boy froze. His protector was going down. The third attacker lunged at the boy himself, the sharpened toothbrush aimed straight for his chest. And in that instant, the boy knew this wasn't just a lion's fight anymore. It was his. The last stand. The attacker lunged, the sharpened toothbrush flashing in the sunlight. The boy's instinct screamed, and he moved without thinking. His hand shot up, grabbing the man's wrist. The two crashed to the ground, rolling in the dirt, the weapon inches from his chest. The crowd roared, guards shouting from the sidelines but not stepping in. To them, this was just another show. Survival was the only referee. The boy twisted hard, his fingers clawing, his lungs burning. The shank nicked his shirt, tearing fabric. But he held on. Finally, with a desperate scream, he slammed his head forward into his attacker's face. Blood burst from the man's nose as he crumpled. The boy scrambled to his feet, chest heaving. The lion, staggering but still standing, knocked out the last attacker with a brutal elbow. Together, battered and bleeding, they stood in the middle of the yard. The gangs didn't move. The guards didn't rush in. The silence was deafening, because everyone understood what had just happened. The boy was no longer prey. The law of Rikers. That night, back in his cell, the boy sat against the wall, his knuckles raw, his body aching. But for the first time since stepping foot inside Rikers Supermax, he wasn't shaking. He had survived the tests, the beatings, the fire, the blackout, the ambush, and more than that, he had fought back. In Rikers, there's no rule book, no safety net. There's only one truth that every inmate learns sooner or later. The strong survive, the weak fall. But the boy had discovered something deeper. Survival wasn't just about muscle or blood. It was about refusing to break, even when the whole prison wanted you crushed. And as the chants echoed faintly down the block, no longer mocking, but carrying a strange new respect, he realized something. He hadn't just survived Rikers. He had become part of its story. The story of how, in a place built to destroy the weak, a boy learned the hardest truth of all. Sometimes, the only way to live is to fight like you're already dead.